I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Deuteronomy, the 31st chapter. We're into lesson number 9, which is the final speech that Moses is making, and he may end his particular book in chapter 31, which means 32, 33, and 34 may have been written after his death, but they do record his death. So I don't think he recorded his own death. But there may be the supplements here that we see what the song is that he composed. We see the sayings that he said at the end. There's a history of his end. But we'll pick up on some of this in this particular chapter. Last week we spent quite a bit of time on the statement, I'm 100 years old and I can no more go out or come in. The very first thing you think about is that the guy's too old, right? He's too old to come in and come out, and yet at the end of the book, he never lost his stamina. He had never wasted away completely. His eyes were not dim, so he could see efficiently. That was not the problem. What we did see from Numbers, the 27th chapter, that there's a component that he was not able to do any longer. That was to be a leader of the people. What does a general do when they lead? They lead them out, they lead them back in. They lead them out, they lead them back in. And this particular passage in Deuteronomy 31, he said, I can no more come out and go in, and Jehovah has said to me, thou shalt not go over the Jordan. So does that mean he can't come out and come in? Because he can't go over the Jordan? That's the punishment, and we'll see how that happened in this lesson. Hopefully you get there. And then, so what is that component? Well, you're not old in the sense that you can't see, and your vigor is there. You're 120 years old, but that's the age you're going to be when you die, into the book. But what you can't do is lead my people any longer because you failed as a leader. And when you failed as a leader, there's going to be a punishment for you. That's the third element here. But what Numbers 27:17 is stating that who's going to be the leader of the people going in and coming out in the new land. Quite a bit younger. His name would be Joshua. So what that meant going in and coming out is being a leader, which I think is a vivid picture of what we're speaking about. Question number 2. And if I know there's 6 of you back there, we're not going to do a pop test, but if you got an answer, bring it on, okay? So I'm sure you've studied Deuteronomy 31 this week, not knowing where we're going to be. But we're going to move here. So if you have an answer, you'll see it in the text. Feel free to join the class. What type of courage does faith offer? I know what God is offering that, but what type of courage does faith offer when after Joshua offered Joshua and the people of God? What kind of courage does faith offer? And so what will you do? When you trust God, you'll be strong, okay? But what will you do? You will put it into action, won't you? We call that obedient faith. Listen to what faith offers Joshua is that I will implement, I got the courage, what you're saying, because God is with me. And we see this in these verses 1 through 8, but pick up at verse 3. Jehovah thy God will go over before thee. He will destroy these nations from before thee, and thou shalt do what? What kind of courage is it going to take for him to complete obedience of his trust and faith? He's going to have to dispossess them. That means conquer the people and take over their land. And what was so interesting that Israel took so much time to possess their possessions. God already gave it to them. But they spent a number of years trying to possess it. And that's the courage the type of courage that I will go into battle. If you heard anybody say he'll run through a brick wall for that coach? Because he trusts him. He believes in him. He'll do anything that he tells him to do because he trusts him. That's the type of courage that implements what God is trying to make you courageous upon. Verse 4, Jehovah will do unto them as he did unto Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites. So in order to build this faith is that here's what I've done before. Now you got to trust me. I will do it again. You'll possess their lands. Verse 5, Jehovah will deliver them but before you, and ye shall do unto them according to all the commandment which I commanded you. What is it? Go take the land. Go take the land. Be strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be affrighted of them. For Jehovah thy God is he that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee, but he won't do a thing if you're not going to put it into action. People talk about courage, but the courage is when they put it on the line. Courage is when they implement what they trust in God all about. And that's the courage that Joshua had. He had the courage, God's with me. God will dispossess the land. I'll just come in and fulfill my part of it. Be strong and courageous. He's always going to be there. Verse 8, Jehovah, he it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. All that's what goes in here, and then you put it into action. Obedience of faith. Obedient faith is the saving faith. And we can, I feel strong. I'm strong in the Lord, and I'm all of those things. But until you put it into action, that's what God is giving him courage. To strengthen his faith so he will do his part. Lead them in, lead them out, dispossess the land, and he's given them all these things. He trust in him. This is what he swore to give to the people. Oh, God doesn't break his promises, does he? That's just to make you strong. He will then deliver his part as well. So that type of courage is not just talking about it. It's doing what God wanted them to do. Any questions or comments you might have? All right. Question 3. What 4 things were to be accomplished in all? And you might read in all 7 years at the Feast of Tabernacles. I meant in all, and there's a phrase there that I want us to pick up that's not written real well to get you focused on what I was trying to get you at. But every 7 years, every year was the Feast of Tabernacles. But every 7th year is what he talks about in verses 9 through 13. Moses wrote this law, delivered unto the priests, the sons of the Levi, that do what? What did these sons of the Levi do? That bear the ark of the covenant of Jehovah. That might be the Kohathites from Numbers 4. That's their job. Take care of the ark of the covenant. That's where the law would be placed. So Moses wrote this law and delivered it unto which people? The priest. The sons of Levi. Those that bear the ark. And interesting, he entrusted the law with those who are supposed to be teaching it. He entrusted the law to the religious leaders. They would be connected with the Ark of the Covenant. That's where they could go get that law. And here we see it applied in this particular area. Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the set time of the year of what? The 7th year was the year of what?
The remission of debts.
That's right, remission of debt. Now, the year of Jubilee was the 50th year. That's different. Every 7 years would be this year of release, and in the Feast of Tabernacles. Every year, Tabernacles feast, everybody would have to come to Jerusalem or wherever he set the place would be, and God's people, after they got the land, would be Jerusalem. And so there was a year of release, the tabernacle. So what I want you to see here, what 4 things were to be accomplished in all, and let's now make the next step. What was to be done? And this will take care of the next question too, why that Feast of Tabernacles was important. But right now, that question number 3, what were they to do? And I'm not just going to read it to you. What's happening here? What were they to do on this 7th year of the Feast of Tabernacles? Read the law. That's why it gives it to the priests. They will be bringing that, and now because it hit on a particular point. And they would read the law. Would all of the males have to be in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles? Was that one of the feasts in which all Israel had to assemble? And that's what we see here. All Israel is to appear before Jehovah, verse 11. And one of the instances we see in Nehemiah 8, remember Nehemiah, they're coming back from captivity. Nehemiah 8 is the Feast of Tabernacles, and they read the law morning on, and all the children hear it, all the people hear it. What's that about? Well, that's kind of what was going to happen on the 7th year in the Feast of the Tabernacles. It happened on the 7th month, on the 15th day of the month. It would happen after the Day of Atonement, which is on the 10th day of that month. And there would be the Feast of the Tabernacles. Was that a rejoicous occasion? It was instructive, but it was where they would read this law. Now let's talk about this release. You talk about the release of dead, and that's exactly right. And we see that in the 15th chapter. When we see Leviticus 23 about the Feast of the Tabernacles, but we see that it was an idea of releasing of the debt, and the whole point was that there will be no poor people. And yet, Jesus says you'll have the poor always with you. And that's just a way of with all people. And yet in this context, when we see that law given, we're not going to have poor people. Now you can exact your debt from a foreigner, but you cannot take it from your brethren, because we'll have no poor people in Israel. That doesn't mean we get poor, but that was to keep people, because everything started over. If you want to call it bankruptcy, we're through. We're not poor any longer. Now they may get poor and they may need this again, but every 7 years it was recalibrate. And that's what they were to do. Would that be a joyous occasion for some? Yes. And it was a joyous occasion, as the joy of the Lord is your strength, as we see in Nehemiah. The joy of Jehovah is your strength. And they were looking at the 7th month as a sad day, because that's when captivity happened to them. But the Feast of Tabernacles, what were they to remember? When they dwelt in booths, what were they to remember? That in the wilderness God provided for them. Joyous occasion. So be happy. The feast was to be a happy occasion. Poverty is ended in a sense, there's no more debt you have to pay, in that sense of poverty. And is reading the law all day a joyous thing for you? It should be. That's God's word. And that was the occasion of that. So verse 12, assemble the people together, and the women, the little ones, and the sojourners within thy gates, that they may hear, that they may learn, and fear Jehovah your God, to observe all the words of this law. What was to be accomplished in the 7th year of the Feast of Tabernacles? What was the one thing that all Israel is to be there? That would include the women, and not just the males, but in this occasion, the women and the children. And they were to read that law to everyone, to all Israel, read it to all Israel. What was to be accomplished? Hearing, learning, fearing. What does that mean? Learn, and then you reverence God, and then you put it into practice. Observe it. What great 4 things to be accomplished when we're studying our Bibles and when we read our Bibles. Hear it, learn it, make it a part of us. Reverence God, because it's His mind being revealed, and it's His law, and then observe it. There's our obedience of faith that we might have. That's what I'm driving after. A lot of things were happening to all of them, but that was there. So in this next question, we see it. Why the 7th year of the Feast of Tabernacles, an important time in Israel? Debt is being released, but they're reading the law that all of them are to observe as they think about the joyous occasion that God had provided for them when they were in the wilderness. And that kind of comes out in the Song of Moses, and we'll hit on some of that. Any questions or comments on that? All right, we'll move along. Question number 5. Why did God command Moses and Joshua to present themselves at the tent of meeting? Why did he tell him to do this? Look at verse 14. Jehovah said unto Moses, Behold, the days approach that thou must die. Whoa, what do you, days are short, are coming, I must die? That's what he's told. And he says, I want you and Joshua to present yourselves and attend a meeting. What's the reason? That I may give him a charge. I am going to give him an assignment. This is what he's going to be. He'll be the one that leads in, goes out, comes in, comes out. He's the leader, but he'll be charged. And Moses, you're going to die. There's a transition of that leadership. And that's exactly what happens. And as God comes into the presence of them, he's in the tabernacle. There's a pillar of cloud, and the pillar of cloud stood over the floor of the tent. And Jehovah said, Moses, behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up, and they're going to play the harlot. So they were there. Moses, the days approach, you're dying. There's going to be a transition. And this is what I'm there to charge Joshua. He's going to be of good courage and all those things, but he's got a charge for him. How did Moses know the people would rebel against God and would rebel against God and him after his death? How did he know that? That's right. He tells him that, verse 16, because thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and play the harlot after the strange gods of the land, whether they go to be among them, and will forsake me and break my covenant which I made with them. Now, if we looked at in our secular way today, here's a man 120 years of age. You can divide his life into 40, 40, 40. Kind of the big divisions. You know, he's leading a people, but 40 years, you know, he's there, born, Egypt, all those things. And then the wanderings of 40 years with his people, and then these last 40 years. And the two things you tell him, here's his life work that meant something, guiding the people, leading them, the great lawgiver, and you tell him you're getting ready to die, and by the way, after your death, all these people you're leading, well, they'll play the harlot and they will, I mean, what legacy do you have, Moses? He has a legacy of faith in Hebrews 11. But for him to hear that, people would say, that's cruel. Take it up with God. He's the one that did it. And sometimes we think about our legacy. We think about our feelings. We think about that. How do we look at it from God's perspective? That he said, this is what's going to happen. And that's not the only reason he knew they would. Drop down with me to verse 27. For I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck. Behold, while I'm yet alive with you this day, ye have been rebellious against Jehovah, and how much more after my death? What is that telling you? I know it because God said it would happen, but why? I also know it by what? My own experience. Even while I'm alive, you've done that. And even more when I'm gone. My presence will. So he didn't have a breakdown after God told him the truth about things. Oh, I must not be anything. He said, even worse when I'm gone. That influence will not be there. But he knew it by experience as well, because they had rebelled against the people. He had to deal with them in the wilderness. That's the way people are, and that's the way God's people are. And during times of frustration, that's the way any people can be. And God is just preparing them. This is what's going to happen. And so he's going to be doing something. Why did Moses write his song? Why does Moses write his song? To be a witness, and this witness is coming straight from heaven, to be a witness against his people. He's going to state the truth about the character of God's people when they go bad. And he knows it will, and this is why he presents this psalm. Verse 19, I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evil which they shall have wrought, and that they are turned unto other gods. And now therefore write ye this song for you, and teach thou it to the children of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this psalm may be a witness for me. This is God speaking to Moses. Be a witness for me against the children of Israel. God has spoken, because when you go off here and play the harlot, Moses already had a song for you. Now, did they sing it? Was it four-part harmony? Was it everybody singing soprano? Or was it poetry? It's poetic. It has imagery that is beautiful. That is figures of speech. For example, 32:13, he made them to suck honey out of the rock and oil out of the flinty rock. You tell me when that happened in all of our studies of the wilderness wandering. When did they suck honey out of the rock? When did they take oil out of the flinty rock? You're going to have to get your mind into poetry and realize places that you thought was so barren, he blessed you with. Oil out of flint rock? Honey out of the rock? Wouldn't expect that. That's what God did for you. And then you left me. And this song is a witness against them. And it has imagery that is understandable. But we're going to have to work hard to get what is that symbolizing? What is that a metaphor for? What is the meaning of that? And that sometimes taxes us. And that's a long song. And so we won't go into a lot of details, but I want to hit some of it with you. But it was to be a witness against them. And so as we go into this, why should God's people be ashamed in their perverseness? So you're going to have to find a verse in here that dealt with their perverseness. And then you're going to have to interpret it to answer this question. But it's sitting there looking at you. Try this one. Verse 5. They have dealt corruptly. Now I'm reading from the American Standard Version. Yours may read a little differently. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are not his children. It is their blemish. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Oh, perversity. That's probably where I'm going to get this. And I'm asking not that question. I know what their perverseness is. And they dealt corruptly to the point they are not his children. And whose fault is it? It's their blemish. It's their blemish. And we know from Bible, you are of your father, the devil. How can we be of the devil? We do his will. He's a liar and a murderer. That's what you are. You're like your father. And they were not like God. But my question is, why should they be ashamed? Verse 6, do ye thus requite Jehovah? Is this how you pay him back? You people who claim to be the people of God? I'd be wanting to slip under that rock. O foolish people and unwise, is not he thy father that bought thee, that made thee, and established thee? And you don't even look like his children anymore. What's that to do? It's to make you feel ashamed in your perverseness. Remember, this song is a witness from heaven against these people. And God doesn't mind you feeling shame for your sin. In fact, that's what New Testament Christians do when they withdraw from a brother. And you know what that brother did in Thessalonica? He didn't work. He quit his job. He doesn't work any longer. He thinks the Lord's going to come any minute, and he doesn't have to work. And Paul said, you got to work. That's the commandment. But work, neither let him eat. That's what they were to withdraw themselves from that person so they would feel what? Read it in Thessalonians, ashamed. That's the inner feeling about oneself. And that's something you don't do to a people now. You don't ever make them feel ashamed. Now, I don't think we ought to be mean and do that. But when it comes down to sin, and you're driving home what has been done that's wrong, you ought to feel ashamed when you disobey God. And that's a part of teaching. That's a song. Number 346, let's sing that one today. But God would use it against them, and they should feel ashamed for being warped and out of step with God and no longer being a holy people. And we don't want to be that way. Any comments or questions you might have? All right, number 9. What is meant by the statement, he kept him as the apple of his eye? I think this is an interesting statement, but where do we see it in this song? Verse 10, he found him in a desert land, in the waste howling wilderness. How is a waste howling? What is a wilderness howl? Waste howling wilderness. That's probably where the beast howl, because they're in a desolate place. He compassed him about. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Don't mess with my daughter. Why? She's the apple of my eye. Don't mess with my wife. She's the apple of my eye. How do we use that phrase? What's that? Okay, affection. You're special to me. Is that what it means here? That's the way we use it. And I don't think that is being discredited, what I'm about to say. But how does that work when you realize the Hebrew word means the little man in your eye? That little man's precious to you? Maybe. But what does it mean, the little man in your eye? What part of the eye is he talking about? Your pupil. You see reflections in there. He's that little man in your eye. From this passage, what did he say he did for the one who is the apple of his eye? He exalted him, he praised him, he honored him, and said, "You're precious." He could have, but what did he do in this text? But he kept them. He kept them as the apple of his eye. The little man needs some help. He may be precious, but the little man in the eye is tender and needs to be kept, needs to be helped. See if that doesn't work when we study the Bible. In Psalm 17, for example, in Psalm 17 in verse 8, let's see how God used the term throughout the Scripture and see if this is not true. And I don't think it takes away the preciousness of it like we use it, but most people don't have any concept of what it means here when we think about that. Now we can blend them together to see what God meant here. Keep me as the apple of the eye. Keep me under the shadow of thy wings, because I need what? I'm the little pupil. I need protection. In the context of keeping me, it means hide me, protect me. That's a tender part of the eye. Tenderness, we'll take it out here, and compassionate, and that's fine. But here the emphasis is upon keeping this one. Proverbs, and I think you can bring in this preciousness of things, but talk about the law. Keep my commandments and live, and my law as the apple of thine eye. What does he say? Bind them on thy fingers. Write them on thy tablet. It is a precious thing, so you bind them on your fingers. You want to protect that law. You don't want it to go away. You want it to always be there. In Zechariah 2 and verse 8, God's going to bring punishment upon the people who touch the apple of their eye. There he is coming in to protect them from the enemy. So the idea of keeping, where one could hide under the wings, idea of protection is what it means. Because it's the little man in the eye. It's the little man in the pupil, the apple of your eye. It looks like an apple. It's a little man in the eyes, literally what the Hebrew is. And I think that's just interesting to see. But then I can extrapolate from that. That's what it meant in Scripture. And I can say, is there not preciousness with that? The same thing I find, we go to a funeral and we'll say, precious in the sight of the Lord is the what of his saints? Death of his saints. Precious in the sight. And how do we mean that? We went to a funeral and the loved one, they're a Christian, and said they're precious to God. That's fine. But when you find the psalm that was written in, the psalmist is in the context of saying it is something that is so precious that it doesn't occur. It is so precious to my sight. I don't just cause people to die. It's rare with me that I will cause a saint to die. Like it ain't happening. That's why the psalmist says, I know because I'm precious, the death is precious, I know I will confess God in the realm of the living. I'm not going to die because I'm precious in the sight of God. My death is precious. It's something that's so rare. He'd rather me live. Now, does that mean it's not precious? No. And I think there are times when in even that context, you can see that sometimes you might die. But the immediate context is just amazing to me. That I had to realize, wow, does anybody ever talk about that part of it? That's exactly what he meant by it. At the same time, how people use the funerals is fine. There's a principle there that I think is brought forth in the New Testament when he speaks about how precious they are and that their works will follow them. They're precious in that way. But what the word meant is rare. When you have a rare piece of jewelry, is the price going up? Price, supply and demand? It's rare. Price is going up. So it's precious. Why? Because it's rare. And sometimes God used it to encourage you're not going to die. You're going to work through this and you are going to confess my name in the land of the living. And it's like this apple of the eye. There's so much of God's word, riches, and when we first say, what did it mean when you said it, God? I want to start there, and then I'll take it other places. But that's where I want to start, where you start. And that's the point about the apple of the eye. It didn't mean tender, precious, all that, but it meant it's small, it needs protection. And therefore, bind it on your finger, and so forth. And hide yourself under the wings of God. All those things are part of that. Why did Israel forsake their God? Does the same thing happen today among God's people? So why do they forsake their God as we move on hurriedly, so to speak? They were fat. Some versions have sleek, because if you're an ox, would that coat be sleek? Fat. And one version said, you're obese. Well, yeah, because I've got a lot of weight. I'm prosperous. So that's the point that happened. Does riches take people away today, God's people today? We get rich and happy? That, we forget God, don't we? So that can happen today too. Question number 11, why is it important to God for his people to know that there is no God with him? See, no God was with him, and you'll see these things about in the blessings that he was setting forth. In verse 37, and he will say, whence are their gods? The rock is where they took refuge. They didn't take refuge in the right rock, and all through this, I don't have time right now, but you go through, God is supposed to be that rock. He started them, he gave them birth, and that's their refuge, and now here they are suffering the punishment of their sins, just like it would be a testimony against them. And they were learning, where's your rock now? Where's this idol that's going to help you? And so God was doing all these things without any help. And now your God can't do a thing for you. Again, wake them up. That's what the song's about. It's a witness of God against them when they turn against him. What would God do to avenge the blood of his servants? If I whet my glittering sword, verse 41, and my hand take hold on judgments, I'll render vengeance to my adversaries and will recompense them that hate me. I will make arrows drink with blood, and my sword devour the flesh, with the blood of the slain, the captives from the head of their fathers. And again, he'll avenge the blood of his servants. But see, what I wanted you to get is that in verse 35, he's bringing vengeance upon his servants. See, God is not on sides. God is on his side. And there were times in verse 35, if vengeance is mine, I'm going to bring vengeance upon my servants. And then Gentile nations, you better rejoice with God's people, because the rod that I'm using to destroy them with the sword, I'm going to destroy you. And you better rejoice. Paul will take that in Romans 15 and make it a joy of salvation to all the Gentiles. God is using it, Gentiles, nations, be happy, because I'm in charge. And I will bring you down too, when I vindicate my servants, God's people. So he would use nations to bring nations down, and he'd bring those nations down as well. How important were Moses' words to be to his people? How important were those words to be to his people? Verse 47, for it is no vain thing for you, because it is your life. And through this thing you shall prolong your days in the land, whether you go over to Jordan to possess it. How important it is? Let me tell you something. It is your life. That's how important it is. You ever think of God's revelation being a life or death issue? It should, because that's what He designed it for. All right, last two questions. To what city was the mountain of Abarim and Mount Nebo near? Jericho, and that will be when they cross over into Jordan, they'll go up to Mount Gerizim, and where the cursing and the blessings are, and then they'll come down and they'll take, they'll also take Jericho before that. But that's the city that's near there. Now, what do we see in verse 15? Question: what reason does God give for Moses not being able to enter the promised land with his people? We don't have a lot of time to develop this. You can read it in Numbers, the 20th chapter, and what does he say here? He didn't sanctify. So how did God not sanctify God before his people? That's what he said. That's why you're not going to the land of Canaan. So wouldn't you like to? Yeah, I want to know exactly why he didn't go. He wasn't allowed to go back, lead them in there. What did he not? What did he do that was wrong this time? And in his anger and his frustration with these people, he struck the rock when he was supposed to speak to it. God says, speak to it. You don't sanctify me in front of the people. You don't teach them what I taught you to do. You don't set me apart in their hearts. Was that Aaron's problem too? He gets. So where does Aaron die? And this finishes up this chapter. Okay. I'll get both of them. See Mount Hor right here? So you're on this side of the Jordan. Here's the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. So that's way up here, but he didn't go in that promised land. It's the wilderness. He died there. And where does Moses die? What's this mount here that's near Jericho? Mount Nebo. Now, where is that? What was he able to see on this northern side of the Dead Sea as he looked out to the promised land? If you can see forever. People go to Aspen, they can see 30 miles away in the mountains. Way wonderful. What could he see? You can see the promised land. You got Jerusalem not far from there, and there's what will comprise, really, he's in kind of the middle part of the whole promised land. You can see it from afar, but you're not going to go in. So he dies there, and for thou shalt see the land in verse 52, but thou shalt not go hither into the land which I gave to the children of Israel. And that brings us to lesson 10 that's back there, and we will see. Any questions on why Aaron died on Mount Hor? If you go to that mountain today, you can find a place where he died, according to them. There's a little place you can go worship where Aaron died. He's on Mount Hor, and you travel up there if you want to. And then Mount Nebo is where Moses was, as the people are getting ready to go in the land, and he must die. And we'll see in the last chapter he does. Okay, time is up. Thank you.